this up here. All right, so thanks again for coming. So this open house will provide a summary of the preliminary recommendations from the site-specific plan amendment retrospective, which kicked off in October of this year and is evaluating a number of changes to the existing SSPA process. So as I mentioned, we have about a 20-minute presentation. Most of the time we're going to be able to reserve for questions and answers. All right, so before we get into SSPA, we should start with just kind of the main object of our process, which is the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan is used as a guide in decision-making about the built and natural environment in Fairfax County and reflects the community's long-term land use vision for the future. The plan is a legally required document in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Every county and locality must have one. The plan provides recommendations. It is not law like the zoning ordinance, which is used to implement the plan. The recommendations in the comprehensive plan are used by the Board of Supervisors, the Planning Commission, the Board of Zoning Appeals, county staff, and the community as the common basis for decision-making on land use applications. It's a living document, and changes to it are called plan amendments. So as I mentioned, the comp plan can be changed, and the amendment process, there's a couple of different ways that you can go about doing that. For one of the focuses, or the focus of what we're doing today, is one of those ways that you can amend the plan, and it's called SSPA. So SSPA allows anyone to propose a change, and specifically these are looking at changes to the area plan volumes of the comprehensive plan, what we're calling nominations. And so the SSPA nomination period opens every 2 years on an alternating cycle between the North County districts, which are shown in the blue portion of this map, and the South County districts, which are shown in red. SSPA began in 2017 with the North County and oscillated to in 2019 to the 5 South County districts that are shown in red here. I would mention that the area plan volumes really kind of deal with area specific recommendations. And so SSPA is looking at site specific changes to the comprehensive plan, as opposed to countywide changes or even large area planning aggregations of land. So each north-south round of SSPA consists of 3 phases, which are shown in the figure on this slide. The first is a nomination period during which anyone can submit a nomination. The second is a screening period. This is when the district appointed task forces within each district supervisor, within each supervisor's district, form and provide recommendations with staff on which of the nominations should advance for formal review as what we call plan amendments. The screening phase is followed by a public hearing and recommendation on each nomination by the Planning Commission, and ultimately the board takes action on advancing the nominations that result from screening for further study on what we call the Comprehensive Plan Work Program, which is the list of plan amendments that the Planning Division is working on. That third phase is called the implementation phase, and that's when the staff and task forces reconvene and start to review the specific impacts of the plan amendments and provide recommendations resulting from the nominations that are originally submitted. This is followed by another round of public hearings and recommendations by the Planning Commission, as well as a public hearing and action by the Board of Supervisors on the proposed amendment. So the full first cycle of SSPA is nearing its completion, and so staff has begun an evaluation of the process now to determine what works and what could be improved, and this process is called the retrospective evaluation. So this evaluation has identified 3 primary goals to improve the process. The first is to reduce the overall timeline of the review. The second is to expand community engagement. And the third is to ensure a better balance of between site-specific plan amendments and other types of long-range planning studies, such as area-wide studies and county-wide policy amendments. These goals also speak to the need for clearer nominations and additional information to be provided with the nominations so that staff and those that are directly related to or affected by the nominations can really kind of understand the proposed land use changes from the get-go. Community outreach on these goals was conducted in October and November of last year, and it included a community survey, discussions with county agencies, interviews with all of our task force and chairs and vice chairs, interviews with all of our board and planning commissioners, as well as discussions with the development community. The results of the outreach, we're going to go over a couple of the results from the survey in just a minute, but the results of this outreach were presented to the Planning Commission's Land Use Process Review Committee in January, and then the board's Land Use Policy Committee in February of this year, along with a series of draft recommendations for potential program changes. Would also mention that we did reach out to several jurisdictions in Virginia and Maryland to see how they handle plan amendments for specific sites to just kind of get a bit of a comparison between our own process and those of our peers. As I mentioned, we did conduct a public survey in November and early December. This is using an online tool called Public Input. And in total, we received about 450 responses, of which 46 were task force members. It was about half of our task force membership across North County and South County. 47 indicated that they were nominators or members of the development industry. And then 150 were members of the public who had indicated they had been an active participant in SSPA to date. So we advertised and successfully received responses from all parts of the county. A couple of the hotspots for participation are shown on this heat map right here on the screen. So a couple of survey responses that we wanted to pull out as they relate specifically to community engagement. We do have kind of the full range of survey responses in a document on our website, and we can provide those to you if you'd like. We can drop it in the chat if you want to take a look at the survey. It's pretty interesting. This first question right here kind of shows how do people like to stay engaged and hear about planning efforts. And so we found that across all the different types of engagement points, the district supervisors' newsletters, as well as direct contact by both staff and the district offices, as well as our comprehensive plan listserv, were the most preferred channels for communicating about comprehensive planning. And this is in comparison to some of the other types of forums, especially social media, for example. We also asked about people's preferences for engagement methods, especially looking at ways in which people feel as though they can actually engage in community planning, not just hear about it, but actually engage in it. And so we asked about a couple of different forms, so targeted community meetings, open houses, task force meetings, which is our current model, as I mentioned earlier, providing hearing testimony, as well as more passive methods, such as receiving those listserv updates, writing letters to decision makers, different types of engagement. The top engagement method for both people who put in the nominations, what we call nominators, as well as community participants, were targeted community meetings. And by targeted, I mean just being held for and advertised specifically for residents living near the sites. They're still obviously open to the rest of the public, but kind of really gearing towards those that are most familiar with the site. The task force option, which is our current model, that was strongly supported by task force members. But I would reiterate that the community at large was far more interested in having those kind of more localized discussions and in open houses as well. Finally, we asked about whether some potential new submission requirements, such as a new site plan concept, providing earlier nominator engagement, a letter of intent to file a rezoning, property owner's signature, submission fees, whether these types of things could help to would help to result in clearer nominations. So additional information earlier on in the process to help us evaluate the proposals. Across the kind of the main stakeholder types, there was general agreement about the site plan concept and earlier engagement with mixed support for the letter of intent to file a rezoning, owner's consent, or a potential submission fee. So as previously mentioned, the results of this were presented to both the Planning Commission and the board's land use related committees, and they formed a working group of 2 members of the board and 2 members of the Planning Commission who met with us in February and March of 2022 to consider a couple of changes to the process. The recommendations on these on the potential changes are in both in this presentation. We'll go through a couple of them here. And they're also summarized in a white paper, which is on our website. And we can drop a link to that white paper in the chat. This slide summarizes the results of the working group's discussions regarding the revised process. So by and large, the revised process would retain the integrity of the current process with both the nomination period and the screening period, both of those leading to the adoption of a new comprehensive plan work program and the evaluation of proposed plan amendments during that evaluation phase. This, by and large, kind of the same structure overall for SSPA, still retaining that three-step structure. However, the process would be modified to accommodate more adaptable community review, having a nomination window that would occur every 2 years countywide in comparison to the current oscillation every 2 years between the North County and South County. So that's a pretty big change. The new process would also consist of a shorter 1-month nomination window, a 4-month screening phase, and then the timeline for review at that plan amendment stage or the evaluation stage would vary based on the types of amendments that are advanced. So in general, these improvements definitely would reduce the overall timeline in comparison to the current process. So breaking this down into just kind of its constituent parts, That shorter 1-month nomination window would again open every 2 years countywide. So that's a big change in terms of the current process. Submissions would need to meet new criteria, both in terms of the information that is provided with the nomination, as well as have to meet a new eligibility criteria in order to be accepted for review, which we'll get to in a couple of slides. But once accepted, they would proceed to screening. So the screening phase, this is one that we really kind of focused in on and trying to improve the outcomes for this. So community engagement is an important priority during the screening phase, and we would retain it. The only thing I would mention though is that we have huge demands that are placed on our community task forces during this screening phase, and based on the feedback that we've received on this method, we are reconsidering the task force model for screening and not proposing to convene them during the screening phase. Instead of using a task force, we are looking to do targeted community meetings, which would be held to ensure that those that are living and working near the sites and are potentially the most impacted by proposed land use changes are engaged early in the process. So as we mentioned earlier, targeted community meetings are the preferred method of engagement for most stakeholders when we asked about this in the survey, and they're thought to provide more appropriate forums for kind of addressing those localized issues than a task force can. Another change during the screening phase is that we would be looking to do a planning commission workshop, which would take place in lieu of a formal public hearing for discussion of screening the nominations. And so this workshop would be open to the public. It would provide a more deliberative forum for screening with staff, the appointed officials, the nominators, as well as members of the public to ensure that the highest priority nominations are advanced for further review. So the Planning Commission would continue to make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors on which nominations would be advanced to the Comprehensive Plan Work Program for further review as proposed amendments. So that recommendation from the Planning Commission would not change, just the forum for their deliberations would. And then finally, as is the current process, the board action on the work program would be retained following the Planning Commission's workshop. So the last phase, the evaluation phase. So once the work program is adopted with the additional plan amendments, the evaluation phase would begin. The big change with the evaluation phase here is that the timeline for individual amendment review would depend on the complexity of the proposed amendment. So as well as the community engagement needs, the availability of resources. So the amendments don't follow a uniform schedule as they currently do. Instead of using a task force for every nomination, which is the current process, community engagement for each amendment would be designed based on the circumstances of the amendment to provide options for the most appropriate means for reviewing for the review. For example, if you had like a small singular amendment, limited scope, limited impact, that could most likely proceed through either established means such as a land use committee or obtaining feedback from the immediate neighbors through another round of targeted community meetings. Again, ensuring that there's public participation, ensuring that we're hearing from those that are most potentially impacted by the land use changes, but also making sure that we're spending the community's time as well as staff's time as wisely as we can. Areas that kind of the converse of that is areas that have multiple plan amendments in close proximity to one another, where they might have cumulative considerations as well as just more complex singular studies or larger studies, those that have additional impacts that need to be reviewed. Those types of amendments would still most likely require a specially appointed task force, which is the current model. And so the engagement would be coordinated with the district board member, and they'd be able to select an engagement model based on the unique circumstances of the amendment and its location. So we think that paired with the more frequent nomination cycle, the individual review schedule for amendments in this evaluation phase can also help to reallocate community and county resources towards other types of long-range planning activities that are frankly outside of the SSPA process. And so these proposed changes in the engagement model, as well as the changes that we'll review in just a minute regarding the eligibility and submission requirements, this can help allow for a more frequent cycle, but it is very much a package deal. Taking kind of one piece of this away would require kind of looking at a different model. But we'll get into a couple of more details regarding the submission process. So these are the justification criteria. So these are the criteria that would be used to determine kind of that and address that fundamental question when a nomination is submitted, which is what really compels the need for looking at a land use change with this proposal. So this set of modifications relate to that specific question. So as a part of the nomination, nominators would be asked to provide a statement of justification, which is the current practice, and it would be based on a set of criteria. And so these criteria include, how would a proposal address an emerging community concern or change in circumstances? How would a proposal advance objectives that are in the current comprehensive plan, and are they not, and making sure that they're not contrary to longstanding county policies? Additionally, beyond the comprehensive plan, how can the nomination or the proposal align itself with the goals of the county's other board adopted policies, such as the strategic plan, One Fairfax policy, the community-wide housing strategic plan, and economic success plan? Basically, as applicable, are we meeting the goals that are outside of the comprehensive plan, but in these other board adopted policies? And then finally, if a proposal has been resubmitted from a previous cycle in SSPA, it can still proceed to screening. We just ask that those nominations in particular really justify why they're being resubmitted and why an additional round of review is warranted. So a couple of changes to our eligibility criteria. These are the objective criteria that are used to determine whether or not a nomination is eligible for the process. The changes that we have that we've outlined here would really broaden the range of eligible geography by allowing the nomination of land areas that were subject to a previous land use plan amendment after only 2 years from the date of adoption. That's in comparison to the current 4-year requirement. So this allows for areas that had been looked at up until about 2 years ago to be re-examined. We are also clarifying that land areas are eligible if they are currently or were previously subject to board action in an amendment with no resulting change to the site's land use recommendations, such as land use mix, density, or intensity. So it's an intentional change, and one of the things, kind of as an example of what that means, an area such as Reston, which is undergoing a wholesale rewrite of its comprehensive plan recommendations. Relatively few sites within Reston are looking at site-specific changes. Most of the changes are to other areas of the Reston plan. And so this is an intentional change to ensure that most of Reston, the areas that aren't being examined from a land use standpoint, can be examined as a part of the SSPA. Last couple, we'd also retain the current restriction on submissions for countywide policies or systems. This is an existing restriction. We are dealing with sites and individual sites, not looking at countywide systems as a part of SSPA. And then finally, we would retain the current restriction on having multiple submissions by a nominator for the same property. Submission requirements. So we are proposing to add several submission requirements as a part of the nomination to enhance the community and staff's understanding of the nominations. So these additional submission requirements would be used to determine whether a nomination will be added to the work program in advance for further review, because based on the submitted elements, it's been determined, after the community meetings, staff recommendation, and the planning commission workshop that, this is something that is of high priority and should warrant further review. So a couple of additional items that are being included here: that illustrative concept plan, which we asked about in the survey, for example, something that can visually depict the nomination. We're not looking for a fully engineered drawing, far from it. I think that we're more trying to get a sense of, how can you visually describe the nomination, but it's not going to be something where you have to have it fully baked at this point. This is something to help us understand, at the high level, what's intended. You're going to ask about a nominator's potential development timeline, if they have one, as well as key factors that they see for engaging the community once something is added to the work program. We are going to be requesting the consent of the property owner of the nominated property, so that is a change. The last is submission fees. And so we are looking to do a $200 to $500 approximately fee to help cover the cost of some of the mailing and notification costs associated with the screening phase. We would also have a waiver provision for community groups that want to put in nominations. We want to make sure that they're not paying out of pocket for those. This is something that's intended for kind of more formal development applications that need an SSPA. All right, so a couple of key takeaways. The recommendations for changes to the overall process were developed with substantial and fairly substantive input from planning stakeholders, and really do provide an avenue for the county to better address long-range planning by ensuring greater flexibility and adaptability within the process, and also just a more efficient use of the process and planning stakeholders' time throughout. The changes would modify rather than replace the current process. So we're still doing 3 steps, but there are a number of changes to it that will enhance some of the beneficial elements of it that have been added to over time and really can help us to organize and prioritize long-range planning efforts. The changes would not only retain the ability for the public to participate at each stage, which is the current status, but it really would adapt and gear community engagement towards the unique circumstances and needs presented by the potential amendments and the people who live and work near the site. So we think that it really is an increase in terms of inclusion and community engagement at each stage. And then finally, with the changes to the cycle frequency, broader eligibility, and then the enhancements to the submission requirements and justification criteria, as well as the revised engagement model during screening, this can really ensure that the high priority nominations that are most in alignment with the county's goals and objectives can advance for further review to that evaluation phase. So we would also trying to orient our division, which does long range planning, more towards broader levels of planning focus, true area studies that are beyond the site specific level, as well as countywide changes. We really want to make sure that we're making SSPA fit into that to the degree that it can by really focusing all of our time on those high priority nominations that are, that should be prioritized in addition to the other things that we need to get to. So we're hoping to have more frequent and periodic discussions with the Planning Commission and the board specifically about that to make sure that we're, we have a North Star in terms of our work. This is the potential timeline. So the recommendations on the retrospective will be presented to the Planning Commission's Land Use Process Review Committee next Thursday, which is May the 19th. Following which the board's Land Use Policy Committee will also discuss the changes, as well as any feedback that's received by the community, the Planning Commission and staff at their June 14th meeting. So on this current timeline, we do anticipate that the board may take action as early as June the 28th. And then if they do adopt the recommendations, we anticipate that the countywide nomination period would commence starting up in early September. So that is all I have in terms of slides, but I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have.
So Graham, it's Dave Sidler.
Hey, Dave.
Real quick, I'm a little confused on the screening process. For example, Lee District has always screened through their Lee District Land Use Committee. But it sounds like the screening process is a little different now, with community meetings versus a specific task force set up in a district.
That's correct. Yeah. So Lee District, you're correct about that they've traditionally used either the Lee District Land Use Committee, or in this case, they had Supervisor Lusk asked that the Lee District Land Use Committee also be the task force, so to speak, for SSPA.
Right.
And so it's kind of like a distilled, a smaller subset, so to speak, of that land use committee that could commit to those meetings. Yeah, what we are doing with the screening phase recommendations is different. So it's looking specifically, instead of doing it kind of in lieu of a task force for screening, where you'd be walking through over the course of a series of meetings and building towards a screening phase recommendation with the task force. What we found is that what people would prefer as a part of the survey, as well as kind of our lived experience, going through North County and South County, is that having a different type of engagement model can get us the same type of feedback. And in some cases, we even during that screening phase needed to go out and do additional targeted community meetings after the task force had kind of wrapped up to ensure that we're hearing from things.
So how does the process end in either a recommendation or denial if there's not like a task force that's going to vote on it to send it forward?
Sure. So the targeted community meetings would be there to obtain feedback, but we wouldn't be asking for a recommendation during the community meetings. The recommendation would only come with the Planning Commission and their workshop.
Okay, so basically all nominations are going to end up at the planning commission, and the planning commission will sort out which ones move forward.
Exactly. You got it.
Okay. Okay. Got it.
And once again, that workshop with the planning commission, that would, as you would expect, it would still be advertised, open and available to the public, and they would have a role in terms of being able to, participate in that workshop. So
Great.
yeah.
Okay. I also commend you on getting the property owner's signature. I think that's been in the development community, that's been a big issue, and other landowners who have found out that their property's been included in an SSPA process without them actually knowing about it.
Right.
So I do commend you guys for that. I think that's it for me.
Okay. Well, good. Yeah, we've heard fairly unanimous support amongst the board and the planning commission in particular for the property owner signature. There have been some who thought that there were some advantages. I think in a lot of cases that was looking at prior APR cycles, for example, where parks could be submitted, but since we don't have that as an allowance any longer with SSPA, kind of the utility of not having the property owner signature kind of falls by the wayside, frankly. So looking at the limited function of SSPA, which is land use changes and not changes to countywide systems, it seems to have kind of outlived its usefulness.
Understood. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions? As you can probably tell, I could talk about this all day long. So I'll try to refrain from doing so. If anybody has any questions.
One additional, where on the website, or Graham, can you email me the presentation? I'm going to share it with Tim Sampson and a couple of the other folks who are kind of out of town.
You bet. I'm actually having weird problems with my network right this second, but I don't know, Michael or Megan, if one of y'all could.
Just anytime, sometime this week. There's no urgency.
Okay. Well, we've got a lot of goodies on our website right now, including we have a presentation posted. We have the white paper, which is kind of the written description of everything that's in the presentation.
Yeah, I just have found it difficult to. I'm not sure which. I'm on the website now, but I've never been able to quite figure out what I'm supposed to click on to get to the presentation. So
it's first on our list of things to change when we start up the countywide, because it's gotten clunky. Let's just put it that way. We've got a lot of info on that thing. That's for sure.
Dave and others, I'm also going to put just a link to the SSPA website in the chat, which we can also email it, but just for folks to have in the meantime.
That'd be great. Say hi to Billy for me, Leanna.
Okay, they're doing baseball practice up front. For the others on the call, do you have any questions, or if you wanted to put something in the chat, I just want to make sure we give an opportunity for questions, or if not, that's fine too. You can always reach out afterwards.
So Leanna, I just I'm on the website, but I don't know what to click on to actually get get Graham's presentation.
Oh, I don't know if we have this actual presentation up yet, do we?
Okay.
Sorry, the paper is up there.
We have an earlier version of
there's some version. I was gonna say there's some versions for it. If you look at view the recommendations, that if you click on view that link, but yeah, we will certainly post the recording.
Whenever it's final, just send it to me if you would.
Okay. Yeah,
that'd be great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have a great evening.
Yeah, Dave, I just sent
Thanks,
you. Dave, I just sent you the link to the white paper. Directly. Okay.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Y'all have a good evening. Thanks a lot. Informative.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it.
Okay.
All right. Well, for those of you that are, if you have any questions in the interim, then feel free to contact me. Leanna, Megan, and Michael.
Mike, do you have any questions?
Do you have any questions, Michael?
No,
We
no,
should, okay,
very
we can
thorough.
stop recording now. The meeting's over.